The dense jungle of Lubang Island. All around you, there is nothing but deep silence and the constant rhythmic chirping of insects. When the wind blows and the leaves crash against each other, it feels like someone is creeping up behind you. In this eerie, bone-chilling environment, a pair of eyes remained wide open and alert for 30 long years. Those eyes belong to a Japanese soldier named Hiroo Onoda. The Second World War ended in 1945, but for Onoda, the war never stopped. From 1944 all the way to 1974, he lived in these jungles, hiding and fighting his own private war. He had one single order: do not surrender until I tell you to. Now, here's the question. When does the never-give-up attitude become a tragedy for everyone else? Is this a story of incredible loyalty, or is it a case of extreme brainwashing? The story actually begins in December 1944. Onoda was a young intelligence officer in the Imperial Japanese Army. He was sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines with a very specific mission. Before he left, his commanding officer, Major Taniguchi, gave him a final set of instructions. He told Onoda that he wasn't allowed to take his own life, but he also wasn't allowed to surrender. The Major promised, "We might be gone for a few years, maybe 5, but no matter what happens, we are coming back for you." At that time, the Japanese culture of bushido, or the code of the warrior, was at its peak. Onoda took those words as his life's mission. When Japan officially surrendered in 1945, Onoda simply refused to believe it. To him, the news was just a clever trick by the enemy. Whenever he saw planes flying over the jungle, he was convinced the war was still going strong. He had 3 other soldiers with him, and together they made a pact. No matter what, they would never bow their heads. For the next 30 years, Onoda's life was a story of unbelievable survival. They lived on wild bananas and occasionally stole cattle from local farmers to dry the meat for later. Rainwater was their only source of hydration. They spent decades soaked to the bone, covered in mud and leeches, just trying to stay alive. But was this just about survival? This is where the story takes a dark turn. Onoda still saw himself as a soldier on a mission, and to him, the local Filipino farmers were the enemy. Over those 3 decades, Onoda and his men killed at least 30 innocent people who were just working in their fields or walking in the mountains. Imagine those farmers for a second. They were in their own country, on their own land, only to be killed by a ghost soldier from a war that had ended years ago. Onoda's devotion to duty was a living nightmare for the local community. The Japanese government tried many times to bring him home. They dropped thousands of leaflets from planes over the jungle. The messages were clear: the war is over, come home. They even dropped photos of Onoda's family and letters written by his own relatives. Onoda found them. He held them in his hands. But his mind had created a shield against reality. He convinced himself that his family had been captured by the Americans and were being forced to write those letters at gunpoint. He was so deep in denial that even looking at a photo of his own brother didn't change his mind. He just saw it as enemy propaganda. This makes us wonder, is this true patriotism? Or is it what happens when someone is so thoroughly brainwashed that they lose touch with the world? When a person rejects reality to live in a fantasy war, it stops being heroic and starts being a psychological prison. As the years rolled by, Onoda's team began to shrink. Some were killed in skirmishes with the police, others died of illness. By 1972, Onoda was completely alone in the jungle. Yet his resolve didn't flicker. His life finally changed in 1974 when a young Japanese explorer named Norio Suzuki decided to go looking for him. Suzuki had a strange to-do list. He wanted to find Onoda, a wild panda, and the legendary Yeti, in that order. Incredibly, he found Onoda almost immediately. When Suzuki first approached him, Onoda was ready to shoot. But Suzuki stayed calm and told him, "The Emperor and the people of Japan are worried about you." Onoda still wouldn't budge. He repeated the same line he had lived by for 30 years. "I will not lay down my weapons until my major returns and gives me the order." Suzuki traveled back to Japan and went on a mission to find the retired Major Taniguchi. He eventually found him, working at a small bookstore. The old major was flown to the jungle of Lubang. In 1974, dressed in his old military uniform, the major stood before Onoda and officially relieved him of his duties. That was the moment Onoda finally broke. He lowered his sword and surrendered it at the major's feet. The footage of that moment is legendary. When Onoda returned to Japan, he was treated like a superstar. People saw him as a symbol of the old world spirit and the kind of loyalty that the modern world had forgotten. He was given money, fame, and a hero's welcome. However, for the people of the Philippines, he wasn't a hero. He was a criminal. They demanded justice. Their argument was simple. How can you call someone a hero who killed innocent civilians 30 years after the war ended? They believed his actions were inexcusable. But due to heavy diplomatic pressure from Japan, the Philippine government eventually pardoned him. When Onoda tried to settle back into life in Japan, he found himself in a country he didn't recognize. The Japan he fought for was gone. The new Japan was an ally of America, focused on careers, money, and consumerism. Onoda couldn't handle this soft, modern society. He eventually moved to Brazil to start a ranch and live a quiet life. This part of his story is perhaps the most tragic. The very thing he sacrificed 30 years for no longer existed by the time he came back to see it. When we look back at Hiroo Onoda's life today, we are left with two very different versions of the man. On one hand, you have the ultimate soldier, a man with a level of discipline and grit that is almost superhuman. He shows us what a human being can endure when they have a purpose. But on the other hand, we see the consequences of blind faith. Because Onoda refused to look at the truth, many innocent lives were lost. Was he a hero, or was he just afraid to admit he was wrong? Admitting the war was over would have meant admitting that 30 years of his life were wasted for nothing. Sometimes, humans cling to a lie because the truth is too heavy to carry. Onoda's story forces us to ask, where is the line between duty and delusion? When a command becomes more important than human life, is it still worth following? Onoda passed away in 2014, but the debate he left behind is still very much alive. It serves as a reminder that while loyalty is a virtue, blind loyalty can be a weapon. Every time we commit ourselves to a cause, we have to ask, is our persistence inspiring the world, or is it hurting the people around us? Next time you feel like you want to give up on something, think of Onoda. But don't just think about his patience, think about his blindness too. Having a goal is important, but staying connected to reality is what keeps us human. Do you think Onoda was a true hero who stayed loyal to his word? Or was he a victim of a system that didn't care about his life? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Almost gone.